our Friday webinar. Sorry we started a little bit late. We just wanted some colleagues to catch up. Today we're going to be listening to Johann, who's from the National Water Partnership Program. But Vivek, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce Johann. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm going to put my camera on for a moment. I'm Vivek Kasipasad. I'm at the Capital Projects Unit within GTAC, the Government Technical Advisory Center. This afternoon, we are privileged to have Johann Lübbe. Johann is at the National Water Partnerships Office, and he's going to be talking to us about the work that the office is doing on non-revenue water. So first, we're going to introduce Johann I've got his bio, and I'm going to go through that. So Johann is the head of the Water Partnerships Office, which is an entity of the Department of Water and Sanitation, and this is at the DBSA. The office was established to develop and implement standard water services programs, which are aimed at facilitating private sector participation in the municipal water sector. The office supports municipalities and water boards to develop and structure bankable projects to attract private sector investment. Included in all of this are the identification, conceptualization, design, and development of innovative financial products, instruments, and programs to address infrastructure delivery and financing challenges. By training, Johann is a professional engineer who has been involved in planning, preparation, and development of various large infrastructure projects. He's got a thorough understanding of project finance, PPPs, and the municipal environment, and he's also gained experience in the financial and legal aspects related to structuring, financing, preparation, and bankability of infrastructure projects. So by training, Johann is a civil engineer. He's completed studies in law and development finance, and where his research project was titled Project Finance as a Developer of Economic Growth in Africa. Johann, if it's fine with you, can we take questions after your presentation?
Yes, thank you, Vivek.
Then over to you, Johann.
Right, thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to see that I can load my presentation. I hope it is visible. Everybody can see.
It is. Thank you, Johann.
Yeah,
we can see it.
Thanks, Anita. Thanks, Vivek. Thank you very much, everybody, for the opportunity to present to you today. We're very excited about the work that the Water Partnerships Office is doing, and it's always good to engage with different stakeholders, and to also see where we can collaborate and work towards one common goal. So I'll be giving you just a brief overview of the National Water Partnerships Program, and then specifically the Water Partnerships Office and the various programs that we are working on. And then I'm going to specifically focus on the non-revenue water, which is one of the key programs, priority programs that the office is working on. I'm just going to switch my camera off to save some bandwidth, but I'll obviously you'll be able to hear me. So I think for those that knows the water sector, we know that the water is probably one of the most difficult sectors to finance. We know in government, municipalities and water boards, and government in general is normally responsible for the provision of water services, but also the national on the resource side. But there are challenges. We know municipalities are struggling with capacity, with expertise. There isn't always funding available for these projects. And that makes it very difficult for municipalities, for government to provide that service. On the other hand, we've got money in the private sector. We've got skills and expertise in the private sector. And in our engagements with private sector in general, they are so eager to become involved in water infrastructure and water service delivery, but they don't always have the means and the mechanisms and the models to do that because of the challenges that we experience in the sector. So we need to find a way of bringing these two together. How do we bring the private sector together with government and jointly develop solutions? What we did is we looked at the energy sector, and we obviously know of all the successes in the REAP program. And we looked at the program and said, how can we replicate some of those successes in the water sector? We know energy and water is very different, but there were a couple of key common elements that we felt is something that can be applied in the water sector. And one was just to look at things more from a programmatic perspective. I think we often try and reinvent the wheel, but if we can look at things more from a program perspective than from a project's perspective, there's enormous value in that. There was also the creation of the IPP office, which served as a center of excellence for all renewable energy projects, and as part of that program. And we're trying to create something similar with the creation of the Water Partnerships Office. The REAP program had a very specific funding solution, and obviously the guarantee and the Eskom being one off-taker. In that sense, I think water is very different. We've got multiple off-takers or project owners in municipalities. The environment is probably more complex than the energy sector. So we need to come up with alternative funding solutions that will accommodate and enable us to get water projects going. So with that background in mind, the Department of Water and Sanitation, in partnership with SALGA and the DBSA, then established what we call the National Water Partnerships Program. That's the umbrella program, and there's a couple of standardized sub-programs that we refer to that I'll be sharing with you. And with that, we created the Water Partnerships Office. So the Water Partnerships Office is a ring-fenced entity. It's owned by the Department of Water and Sanitation, and it's housed in the DBSA. So it's not a DBSA initiative. We're just making use of DBSA corporate infrastructure because the WPO is not a separate legal entity. There's a steering committee that's been established for purposes of this work and managing and overseeing the work of the office. So the oversight, the committee more or less operates like a board of a company. It's got representation by the department, by SALGA and the DBSA, and the DG of the department chairs that meeting. The main focus and role of the office is firstly to develop standardized programs. And the focus is on how do we create opportunities for the private sector to participate and support government. We see there's a lot of value in a standardized approach. I mentioned earlier that we often operate in silos. One municipality doesn't know what the other is doing. They're developing the same projects. There's huge opportunity, I think, to benefit from a standardized approach, and from if we can develop standardized documentation, models, contract documents, terms of reference, it will become much easier, quicker, cheaper for us to develop these projects so that we don't reinvent the wheel every time we do a project, and we'll be able to learn from one another, improve on the way in which we prepare, structure, and then implement these projects. We saw the the benefit of that in the reprogram, and that's really what we are looking at here, and is really to develop a toolbox for each one of these programs that can be made available to anybody that wants to prepare a project in that specific sector. I think it will also benefit the private sector. For example, consultants, if they know exactly what the terms of reference is going to look like for a non-revenue water project. Currently, if 10 municipalities goes out on tender for consulting services, chances are that you'll have 10 different terms of reference and scope of works. So if we can standardize these approaches, I think there's enormous value. The private sector can the cost of tendering will become less. We can do things quicker and easier. So that's one of the main focus areas of the office. The second is to then really assist municipalities to prepare and structure their projects. We know that there are capacity constraints, especially if one needs to look at alternative mechanisms. How do we get the private sector involved? If we prepare PPP projects, you guys are very familiar with that, but the capacity doesn't always sit in the private sector, and that's where the WPO will also come in, is to provide expertise and support to municipalities in preparing their projects. We'll create some capacity and skilled experts and resources within the office, specifically specializing in water and sanitation infrastructure. And then the office is also looking at facilitating blended financing solutions. So we know government cannot finance all these requirements itself. We have to look at alternative options, and for government rather to come in with filling a gap than having to fund the entire project, if we can mobilize funding from the private sector and DFIs. So that's really the intention of the office. The office is not a bank. We've got access to project preparation funding, but the intention is that we will, once the projects are prepared and bankable and ready to go to market, then we can solicit funding from all types of investors, including DFIs. Also, just to note that the DBSA does not have any exclusive right to finance projects. We're creating opportunities independently, and the DBSA will tender and participate alongside other investors. We ultimately want the best priced solutions for the projects that will be prepared. We are currently busy filling some of the key positions in the office, and hopefully we'll be able to build our capacity relatively soon. This slide just highlights some of the service offerings of the office. We do see it operating as a center of excellence, specifically for water, municipal water and sanitation projects. So what we will be working towards is, as I've mentioned, to assist with the preparation of projects, potentially do procurement, so we can have panels of service providers that we can draw on quicker than, and not having to go for municipalities, having to go out on tender every time. We want to sort of also, I'll come back to just how we look at some of the panel procurement. I spoke about the standardization, bring in best practice, also see the office playing a role as a communication platform. In many of the programs we're working on, like non-revenue water, we have to educate the public around saving of water, why we have to save water. If we look at reuse of water, there's often public perceptions around that, and we see the office playing a role in terms of educating and communicating to create awareness. Then also look at some of the technology and innovation that's coming through, and see how we can promote that. And then also very importantly is to assist with the monitoring, reporting and contract management of projects. So once a project gets implemented, is to provide that support to the municipality so that they can manage the private sector, measure impact, measure outputs, performance, and manage and monitor these programs. We've got 6 programs that the office is working on at the moment. The first 2, probably the priority programs. The first 5 is sort of directly investment-related programs. So the first one is non-revenue water. I'll come back. I'm going to go into that one in more detail. The second one is water reuse. That is where we want to scale the reuse opportunities across the country. We are currently losing a lot of water down our rivers into the ocean, water that's extremely valuable for us as a water scarce country, but we're also able to extract maximum value from what's often called a waste resource. So we can reuse the water, we can generate energy from these plants, facilities, we can beneficiate the sludge, and all of those represent a source of revenue that can then again contribute towards the financing of those projects. We do see triple Ps as probably the most appropriate model to finance and implement reuse projects. Also on this program, we've secured funding from the GCF, the Green Climate Fund. We've secured $235 million for water reuse, for the water reuse program that will go into water reuse projects. And there's a grant component associated with that can be used to do the project preparation on a co-funded basis. And then there's a $200 million concessional loan component that can be drawn on for individual projects to enhance the bankability of those projects as part of a blended finance structure. So quite an exciting program. I'll give you a bit just at the end of the presentation, just a quick update on where we are with that program. The wastewater treatment program is often closely linked to the water reuse, but in this case, we don't always have a reuse opportunity. In some cases, we just need to make sure that our plants are functioning and treating the effluent to the right quality before it's discharged. And we know from the Green Drop report that many of our wastewater treatment facilities are failing. And that program, or this wastewater treatment program, will focus on upgrading, refurbishing, and rehabilitating the sanitation treatment plants. We see triple Ps and the PSP model as potential mechanisms through which the private sector can be mobilized and involved. The non-sewage sanitation program is designed to see how do we scale the rollout of new sanitation technologies. There's a lot of work that's been done internationally to improve and redesign the toilet, to use less water, recycle water. In many cases, you don't have to be connected to a conventional sewer network. And that poses enormous opportunities for a country that's water stressed. And often some of our projects are low density, in some cases very high density, such as informal settlements where it isn't practically possible to implement and put in a conventional waterborne sanitation system. And this poses, I think, huge opportunities because it's much higher levels of service than we are used to in terms of our VIP systems. So this program will really focus on building on the work that's been done by the Water Research Commission through the SARSTEP program. We've secured funding from the Gates Foundation to set up a team in the office that will be driving this non-sewage sanitation solutions. The fifth program is a seawater desalination program. And that's really, we want to see how do we procure at a larger scale desalinated water from the private sector. So it's obviously focusing on the coastal cities, and we want to see potentially on a bid window basis, how do we procure those projects from the private sector? We are exploring different mechanisms. A triple P is, of course, an option, but we're also exploring an IWP, independent water producer model. That's slightly different from a triple P, and we're busy with the design of this program. The last one is more on, it's not a directly investment related program, so management contracts, and that will be used to see how do we get the private sector to support municipalities to get their water business back up and running. So it's to look at a broad range of interventions, capacity support, and so forth to ensure that we create the systems, the processes, the procedures internally and build capacity in municipalities to improve the way in which the water business functions and operates. Just very quickly, the structure of the office is intended to have teams for each one of the programs. So we'll have a water reuse team, a non-revenue water team. Intention is that they will be sort of the center of excellence for those programs. And if a municipality then wants to do a water reuse project, they will approach that team, and that team will have the tools and the documentation, the standardized documentation, models, approaches available, and be able to support with the preparation of those projects. Those teams will also actively source and identify projects. So the intention is not for us to wait for municipalities to put things together or to apply, but we're also actively engaging with municipalities to see where we can support, what projects do they have, and how the office can then support. We're also looking at setting up panels of service providers for each one of the programs so that we have got a specialist a panel available, and if we have to draw on them to do a feasibility study, we can do so quicker. Potentially also looking at framework contracts that can hopefully also ensure that we do things in a more effective manner. And then there will be a couple of specialist resources that will work across the different programs, like climate specialist, financial structuring specialist, project prep specialist, that will then provide support across the different programs. So if we then zoom in a bit more into the non-revenue water program, I think we're all aware of the blue, green, and no drop reports of the Department of Water and Sanitation, with no drop obviously looking at the non-revenue water and the water losses within municipalities. Quite alarming results coming out of the latest review and report. We've seen again an increase in the non-revenue water percentages and the water losses. And we know, I think you are also very familiar with the reasons for that. We know that municipalities are struggling with technical capacity, with just in general with capacity to ensure and to make sure that they can provide the services. So there are certain targets that's been set. I think the aspirational target is to reduce non-revenue water to 15%. We know that in many cases municipalities are sitting above 50% in terms of their non-revenue water. And just with there's so much revenue that's lost in that. We estimate that it's about 2 billion cubic meters per annum that is lost, and that relates and translates into almost over 12 billion rand per year that is lost through water. So this is definitely a low-hanging fruit. It's a quick win. It's something that we have to do. If I just quickly jump back to this, we cannot put in a reuse project or a desal project in a municipality to provide additional water if we're still losing 50 or 60% of that water. So a non-revenue water intervention has to happen And it should be done then in parallel potentially with some of the other interventions that municipalities are looking at. So with that background in mind, we said that there's a need for us to put a comprehensive water conservation, water demand management program in place. I spoke about the standardized approach, but we have to focus on how do we reduce our losses, how do we reduce overconsumption. This is such a concern that as South Africa, as a water scarce country, is amongst the highest water users around the world. So that we need to also start educating, we need to start managing demand so that we can reduce that overconsumption. And then, of course, improve our cost recovery. Unfortunately, we're also in a culture of non-payment, and we need to also see how do we address that? How do we make sure people pay for a service that they are receiving? So part of this program is to really focus on addressing all the causes of non-revenue water. So look at the O&M aspects, the metering aspects, the billing and revenue collection, our aging infrastructure, illegal connections, leak repair. So there's a whole host of potential causes of non-revenue water that we need to address. If one looks at it from a funding and implementation perspective, we want to develop a suite of options that can be used. So not to only focus on one, although we do believe that the performance-based contracting mechanism or model is an appropriate one for non-revenue water. But in some cases, municipalities might be able to do raise funding on their balance sheet and implement themselves. We may create SPVs, but we've really are focusing on performance-based contracting models. It's been proven internationally that it's very successful in reducing non-revenue water around the world. So that's a mechanism and a model that we are really focusing on now and want to develop and customize for us in South Africa. There's, of course, various interventions and ways in which one can address non-revenue water. One of them is to firstly do a detailed feasibility study to determine in your different demand zones what interventions are required, how will you phase that, how will you finance that, and really come up with a comprehensive plan of addressing and reducing your non-revenue water. This, however, has to go further than just a strategy. This is really looking at the financing elements. How are you going to structure and finance so that once you're done with that study, you can go to market and you can start immediately with raising funding, dependent on whichever model it is that was selected or is the most appropriate. We also need to then focus on where do you start. So obviously it makes sense to start with the interventions that creates the highest benefit. So your least capital intensive with the highest reduction in losses is something that you want to start off with. So that's typically your metering, your pressure reducing infrastructure that will result in that. And then you can often delay your higher capital intensive interventions, such as pipe replacement. Municipalities often want to start there, but it's such a capital intensive exercise, and it's often you can reduce your bursts if you reduce your pressure, for example, which can then delay some of these high capital investment interventions. I'm not going to go into all the detail around the benefits of non-revenue water reduction. I think you are also aware of that. I can maybe just highlight the last 2 years is that firstly is to improve our climate resilience. We've mentioned that South Africa is a water scarce country. We are experiencing water shortages in many areas, and it just doesn't make sense to lose what is a scarce resource. So that will obviously benefit a lot. And then is to defer and delay often large capital investments. We've come across projects and municipalities where they want to spend billions of rands to bring in water from different areas and different catchments because they're running out of water, but they lose 60% of that water. It just doesn't make sense. If you can first fix your non-revenue water, reduce that, and then you can often delay these large capital investments. So amongst then others, as part of a bucket of benefits that non-revenue water delivers. If we just focus quickly a bit on performance-based contracts as an option for reduction of non-revenue water, it's very interesting. The World Bank in a study found that PBCs are almost 70% more effective in achieving reduction in non-revenue water than if a municipality or a utility does it themselves. So that's significant, and we want to then build on that and see how do we leverage and utilize PBCs in a more scaled manner to assist us in reducing the non-revenue water. PBCs are more effective. We can, they provide financial incentives that motivates the contractors to achieve their targets. So we're paying for outputs. We're paying for amount of water saved and targets being met, instead of just paying for inputs that doesn't necessarily lead to those results. And one can also introduce financial penalties if targets are not being met. So thereby transferring some of that risk to the private sector. Now, municipalities, if they want to achieve their NRW goals, by doing that, they would typically like to extend the service delivery, not only in terms of reliability and provision, but also to extend it to more customers. We need to meet potential demand, growth in demand. We want to increase the resilience and security of supply, and then also improve the financial performance of the municipalities. All of these things will result in or be benefits to the municipality if they reduce their non-revenue water, and performance-based contracting models can obviously assist them in doing that. So just a couple of observations around PBC models. It's really there to take advantage of the expertise and incentivize performance of the private sector. And here we're talking about specialized private sector firms. It's an incentivized form of outsourcing technical and construction activities. It is note the municipality will retain control of the utility and the operations and the assets. Want to leverage private sector investment, and this is such an important one. So ideally, if we can get the private sector to come in and finance all the interventions, that will be our ideal case that we strive to. It won't always work like that. In some cases, municipalities will have to contribute, but obviously we want to see how do we maximize that investment coming from the private sector. We're also looking at potential guarantee or blended financing facilities that can support and de-risk transactions and crowd in the private sector funding. Some of the expected benefits of PBCs, firstly, it's faster reduction of non-revenue water. Municipalities are very constrained in terms of funding, so that they often have got the strategies, but they don't have the funding. So they do little bits and pieces, and it takes them, if they are lucky, 10 or 15 years to achieve that those interventions. But if we can through performance-based contracting models fast track those interventions with the funding and the expertise coming from the private sector, we can reach those benefits much quicker. It's also a mechanism to access the latest technology. Obviously, the private sector will invest in technology to do things more effectively, I think they can mobilize much quicker than government can, and they do that on the back of a profit motive, and want to maximize their profits that they can generate. Also tapping into the hard-won experience from the private sector. And then lastly, it's very important, is paying for results and not for inputs. Our traditional mechanism is to say, Mr. Contractor, go and put in a pressure reducing valve, we're going to pay you for that, or replace this pipe, we're paying for you for it, irrespective of what the result is. And in this case, we are paying for the results. So the contractor must decide what and when and where he wants to do things to maximize the results and the performance and in their meeting the targets. As part of our the design, we're currently busy with the design of this program. We've appointed an advisor, a team of advisors to assist in developing the standardized documentation, help us come up with these models. And as part of that, we did a bit of a market sounding exercise to determine what are municipalities doing in this space and what are their challenges. So just some of the results from that work is that found that most municipalities have got current strategies or are developing those strategies to reduce their non-revenue water. These strategies typically span 5 years, but very few link their budgets to those interventions. And of course, that is not, having a strategy, but not having a plan to achieve that is not going to go anywhere. We know that most municipalities are doing their IWA water balance, but there's also very limited data available that will support a potential rollout of these interventions. Key challenges include inadequate customer meters, poor payment levels, aging infrastructure, the maintenance of the pressure management systems. We know the CAPEX budgets are under significant stress, and overall the strategies are underfunded. Just from some of the funding aspects, the lack of funding, maybe just repeating there. What's very encouraging is this third bullet, is that most municipalities that we've interviewed are saying that they are willing to consider private sector participation and performance-based contracts to address their challenges. So that is a first step in the right direction. But then they're also saying, but we're worried that we don't have the capacity to manage these contracts. And specifically performance-based contracting models, we have to have a baseline and measure against that, because the contractor will be paid according to performance and meeting certain targets, and you need to be able to audit and to measure and to manage those contracts. We know that some municipalities have already explored and implemented PBCs. Mfuleni is a well-known case study. But we know that once the PBC exited, then things went back to where it was before. So we have to find mechanisms also to sustain the impact that PBCs can potentially have on reducing the non-revenue water. As we mentioned, we're busy with the design of the program. It's got various elements. We're looking at it from a technical perspective, financial, the institutional and legal, social and environmental, stakeholder management. The intention is that we develop this toolbox of documentation information that can then be used to do non-revenue water projects. The intention is not that the WPO will hold on to all of that and only use it itself. We want to say it's available to anybody that wants to support municipalities in reducing their non-revenue water. So it's really developing this suite of documentation and standardized approaches. So So this is just the process that we apply at the moment. So if we engage with the municipality for them to formally request support from the office, we can then source some of the project preparation funding that will be required to do this. If we then look at the preparation, there's two options that we are currently applying. The first one is that we go and do a city-wide or a municipal-wide feasibility study to identify demand zones, prioritize interventions, see how will we implement these interventions, look at the phasing, look at the financial modeling around all of that, and specifically how we're going to finance the implementation. So that's the one option. The second option is where many cases municipalities that we are engaging with now are saying, well, we've got this priority area, we want to do a PBC. So before looking at it from a complete municipal-wide perspective, let's do a feasibility or the design of a PBC for a specific priority or pilot zone. So we will then go in and support with the design of that, and then immediately thereafter be able to procure the PBC contractor for implementation, and then potentially roll it out into other zones as well. And then support the municipality with the bidding process, the management of the contractor, and so on. So we currently engaging with a number of municipalities, a number of metros that are interested in this to see how can we support them with the piloting a PVC, and there's some non-metro municipalities, some intermediate cities, some smaller municipalities that we've got on our pipeline and that we are engaging with to see how do we support them with this. I think just before I end off, I just want to give you a quick update on some of the other programs. So the first one is the water reuse program. As I've mentioned, we've secured funding from the GCF. We've appointed the CSIR to conduct the primary screenings and do detailed climate assessments on projects. So the GCF obviously looks at this from a very strong climate perspective, and we have to demonstrate that the shortage of water in a specific municipality is often as a result of climate change. So to get across that first hurdle, we need to do quite detailed climate assessments. So we have appointed the CSIR, and they are busy with those assessments. We requested them to do it for all the metros and the intermediate cities. So it is the 8 metros plus I think 39 or so intermediate cities, just under 50 municipalities. And once we are done with that work, then we'll have a list of projects that qualify from a climate perspective. We know that the bigger cities and towns are where the volumes of effluent is and where the offtake opportunities are. So that's where typically the water reuse projects can be prepared, structured, and implemented. So once we've got that initial criteria and then identify who qualifies, then we will go further and start building a pipeline of projects to do the preparation of these water reuse projects. So there's potentially a strong, over time, a strong pipeline of water reuse projects that will be prepared, structured, and as I said, the mechanism, or probably one of the more appropriate mechanisms, would be to be a triple P and design and structure those as triple Ps. We have held a workshop with the municipalities to introduce them to the program, and we'll be following up with them once we've completed with these climate assessments. On the wastewater treatment program, we need to identify projects that can potentially be supported. As we said, these are probably smaller municipalities, smaller projects where there isn't necessarily a reuse opportunity. We just need to make sure that those plants are functioning properly. So that obviously the Green Drop report provides us with a shopping list of projects, and we are working on and seeing, you know, where can we support and just get that program running. Seawater desalination program still at an early stage, conceptualizing the design of the program, and we've started with that. Non-sewage sanitation program is obviously a lot of work that's already been done by the WRC in terms of demonstrating some of the new technologies, and there's potential 2 projects in eThekwini and City of Cape Town that the Partnerships Office will support with. I think there's a huge requirement to start marketing this new technologies across the sector. So that ranges from municipalities, municipal officials, engineering consultants, departments, human settlements, education, to make them more aware of these new technologies and seeing how we can then really scale the rollout of these technologies in projects across the country. And the management contracts program, we're working alongside the city support program. They've really conceptualized this, but see how we can support them, a potential pilot project around this. Vivek, the end, I hope I haven't gone over time, but I'll be happy to hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Johann. No, we're good for time. Thank you for that. That was quite exciting. And the exciting bit for me was that how you bring in several skills. I mean, you've got the engineering, you've got the finance, you've got the legal people, and you bring it to bear on a challenge that is pretty serious for the country. And you're putting solutions together. Now, you've outlined several of the challenges in developing the water services, and these are some of the things that stood out for me, is that while you're identifying these challenges, you're also identifying the opportunities that exists. And one of the things is to get assistance from the private sector, particularly in skills and accessing finance. Now, this has come up a couple of times for me, in that you are you're drawing from the REIPP program, and what you're, well, not the whole story now, but you're saying that there are elements that are similar to what you're doing, but while you're doing that, you're also quite mindful of the fact that the water sector presents quite some unique situations that require a different type of thinking that to the problems that need to be addressed. The other thing that that stood out for me is the performance-based contracts, and it's not the usual contracting methodology. And in one sense over here, I'm thinking this is similar to a PPP type project, and the whole thing over here revolves around paying for results. Now, before I carry on, can we get to questions from the colleagues? Colleagues, any questions? We have Georgina.
Thanks, Vikesh, and thank you to Johann. Thanks very much for this presentation. I think it's a really interesting insight into the potential that lies within the WPO. I'm not going to wear my Operation Vulindlela hat today. I'm actually going to wear my Director of Environmental Economics hat. One thing that stood out for me was your assessments, those climate assessments. Such a broad grouping of municipalities that will be assessed, up to 50, you said, and that's going to be work done by the CSIR. Now, one of the questions I have is around capacity and capabilities of the municipalities to take that process forward themselves. There obviously would be work done through the C40s program and quite a lot of awareness on climate issues in municipalities. But I just wanted to get a sense of what would happen from this process of assessing municipalities on climate impacts, so that you do attribute performance issues related to climate, but separate that out from other issues. I think it's a little bit difficult to attribute performance issues directly to climate. So I think the study is going to be a significant contribution to understanding climate issues. And I think it relates very closely to the circular economy as well, because there's a very close link there. So my main question is about capacity and the municipalities being enabled to do those assessments as part of that project. So very, very exciting. Thanks.
Johann?
Yeah, thanks, Georgina. I agree with you. I think it's extremely exciting. I don't think we have ever looked at through such a strong climate lens at supporting infrastructure development. So that is definitely something. The GCF looks at this from a perspective to say that we must demonstrate that the reason for the shortage of water is primarily as a result of climate change. We recognize that there are developmental impacts, there's capacity at municipality level and so on. But we need to make that link to a primary cause of the shortage of water being as a result of climate change. And there's, of course, lots of data and climate models and studies available. It's also a reason why we approach the CSIR to do this. So this is going to do it from at this stage, a once-off exercise, a once-off assessment to determine the causes of water shortages in a specific municipality. The ability to then sort of implement that, that's where the WPO will also be able to provide support in terms of taking those projects forward. But we're not relying on municipalities themselves to do these assessments. As we said, the CSIR has been appointed. They're currently running with this. They've obviously looked at the Green Book and so on, or developed a Green Book. So that provides a lot of input. So at least it's not something that we will be relying on municipalities to do themselves. We know that the larger metros have already embarked on a lot of plans and strategies and resilience type work in terms of climate assessments. But we felt that this is something that we should initiate and at least do this first screenings so that we can determine which projects will qualify, and then we can support them further with the preparation activities.
Thanks, you. Colleagues, any more questions for Johann? Well, in the meantime, while the colleagues are getting their heads around questions, Johann, I have one for you. If you look at the net, there's a couple of maps, and there's a map that I've seen on Waterface's website, and it's a map of the country indicating areas of non-revenue water. Now, at the bottom of the map, they state something like, there are large areas with limited information. Now, what I'm asking over here is twofold. One, the extent of missing information, And the information that you have, how reliable is that? And all of this is feeding into your program. I mean, how does all of that go about?
Yeah, sure, Vivek. That's such an important aspect. Without information, and I think that was one of the things that the department also struggled with in terms of the no-drop report, is that many municipalities weren't able to provide any information. So in a number of cases, I think assumptions were made and had to be made. The lack of information is really a challenge, because without the data on your losses, on zones, on metering, and you often look at you have to look at a history. You have to look at a year's data, for example, in order to design a performance-based contracting solution. And specifically relating to PBCs now, you have to create that baseline against which you will measure and monitor the contractor. And remember, you're going to pay him according to that baseline that you have. So that's so important. And if the data is lacking, it just makes it much more difficult to structure a PBC. We often, when we engage with people, and especially at the political level, they say, but where's the projects? Why aren't we implementing projects? And we're saying, listen, we first have to prepare. And I mean, obviously, you guys will be very familiar with that, but we have to design and structure the project in a way that we can then accurately take it to market. We also don't want to take project to market and the private sector doesn't respond because they see too much risk or it's not well prepared and well structured. But the data forms the basis of all of this. So it is a challenge. Yes, some municipalities are more diligent and they've got more access to data. Accuracy of the data is also so important. If data is available but it's wrong, it's incorrect, it's there are gaps, then it's also not very useful. So we have to, I think, through this whole process, start off with municipalities that where more data is available, and then start building up through mechanisms to ensure that the municipalities that don't have it can also start over time improving the availability and the accuracy of the data.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, another one. I mean, I suspect that, check my thinking over here. Now, this is just the way I'm thinking. That if you're looking at a metro, a municipality, or even a small municipality, there's hundreds of water loss projects that you have within that entity. And if you had to plot a graph, I mean, you touched on this on slide 8. And if you had to plot a graph, it would be a declining balance type graph of volume and cost. Yeah. Now, at some point, you need to say, this is where I stop implementing projects. Everything on the one side of the graph, I need to implement because it makes sense to do it. There's value in doing those projects. Now, what I'm asking, I think, also talks to the cost of water and how you value that water. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. That's it's an interesting observation. I think one needs to get that balance of where do you start and where do you end. And in some cases, you might find that it's just too expensive for the benefit that will be generated. I think we've seen and experience has shown, and many projects represent this, that non-revenue water interventions do provide some quick wins and short payback periods. In many cases, the losses are so severe, and by just spending a little bit of money, you can reduce that significantly. So your cost benefit is so high in terms of the benefit that you receive versus the capital intervention. It makes sense to do it, and we have to do it. So, but then as you progress and as you start creating those interventions, creating the savings, that might have to cross-subsidize some of your higher capital-intensive projects, and that's got less of a benefit. But the feasibility studies normally that we are doing will determine that. Will determine how do you phase this? Which interventions do you start off with? How do you stage them? And where do you stop? Because sometimes you may have to stop somewhere if the capital cost is just too significant and there won't be a way to finance them. But then it is to see then also how do you cross-subsidize? How do you use and ring-fence some of your savings that you've generated with your lower capital-intensive interventions and apply that to finance the more capital-intensive interventions. So those are part of the whole exercise of programming this, of designing your program and seeing what can happen where.
Thanks for that, Johann. And Yolette, you've put a question on the chat. You want to ask Johann directly?
Yeah, I can ask directly. So I was just, in addition to the question that Vivek has just asked about the non-revenue water, in your assessment of the environment, what have been the initial indicators of what are the causes of these huge water losses? What is it that we're not doing that other countries are doing that is causing us to lose so much water?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think South Africa is not necessarily unique. I think many countries across the world are struggling. But for us, the main causes are typically capacity challenges at municipalities, both from a skills perspective as well from a funding perspective. We know that water revenues doesn't find its way into water infrastructure. It often gets taken to other applications within municipalities. And that poses a significant challenge. If we can ring-fence our revenues and take it reinvest it into water infrastructure, both from a capital and an operation and maintenance perspective, that will make a huge difference. But it's that's the start of this whole thing, because then municipalities don't have the expertise and the capacity, often the manpower to apply and to maintain the infrastructure. And because of that, we find that the pipes start bursting and meters aren't installed or maintained. There are illegal connections and things like that. So I think it's a combination of factors, but it really boils down to, I think, those elements in terms of where we are at this stage. And unfortunately, I think we've it's sort of exponentially increased now, that because of years of non-investment, of a lack of maintenance, we've now come to a point that it's often very difficult to get that back. But if we can apply some of these interventions, get the private sector involved, we do feel that we can turn this around.
Thanks, Johann. Johann, with the electricity sector, we've seen that there's been challenges related to maintenance, and at some point maintenance caught up with the sector. And along the same lines, there was very little going on you could argue, very little going on in the line of new investment coming in, new generating capacity coming in. On similar lines, are we heading in the direction of watershedding? Is that a reality? Do we need to prepare for that? What's the thinking around that?
So that's a difficult one, Vivek. I think unfortunately, a water network works different from an electricity network. Like if you speak to colleagues in the city of Cape Town, they indicated that it will be catastrophic to a water network if you switch it on and off. So that's why they introduced, reducing pressure, reducing supply, which is then going to be able to manage or have a less detrimental impact on your water system, but it reduces that demand. So we have to look at this differently. I think the way in which electricity, we also see that the impact on this load shedding and the switching on and off on the substations and so on. So it's also not good for any type of infrastructure, but I think less so for electricity if we compare it to water. But we need to start investing back into the water systems. Otherwise, we are going to run into serious trouble. And for me, it's also an education process. We must make sure that people are educated. They need to understand why they need to conserve water. And that opens up a different conversation around the pricing of water. I think in South Africa, either we pay too little for water, or people don't pay at all. And that makes it very difficult. Because if I don't care if my tap runs or if there's a burst in my street, I don't pay for the water, or I pay very cheaply for it. So why do I care? So I think that education process is also one that has to happen. It's probably a more difficult one. It's got a political perspective associated to it. So, but I definitely believe, if I start feeling it in my pocket, then I'm going to look after the water much better.
This last bit that you mentioned, Johann, is really quite interesting. And I'm bringing it over here to one of the slides that you had towards the end of your presentation, where I understood that, or what I understood was that you said that there's no opportunity for reusing used water. Now, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking of the case of Namibia. They're a water scarce country, probably a lot more water scarce than us, but they have a recycling program in Windhoek where they use a lot, or actually I think they use all of their wastewater. It's recycled and it's used. I mean, can you tell us or talk to us around that?
Sorry, Vivek, did you say I said there isn't an opportunity to reuse?
Yeah, there isn't.
No, sorry, then I must have expressed myself incorrectly. Sorry. Now, there's definitely an opportunity to reuse.
Okay.
We have to start reusing water. As a water scarce country, we need to diversify our supply of water, and one of that is, I think, our surface water has probably, we've extended that to the maximum. There isn't much opportunity to build new dams and increase our surface water supply side, but we have to start introducing things like reuse. We have to start introducing things like desal. I think what I meant, maybe what I might have meant, is to say that it doesn't make sense to implement those reuse opportunities if you still have 60% non-revenue water. That doesn't make sense. So we have to address the non-revenue water issue in parallel or alongside putting in reuse projects. And I mean, the Windhoek city of Windhoek they've been doing reuse since the 1960s. So they were one of the first countries in the world to start looking at reuse. So the technology is there. There's many examples around the world that are looking at reuse opportunities. And from a reuse perspective, we need to, there's different ways in which you can reuse water, or different applications of that reused water. You can treat to potable standard. You can treat to either directly or indirectly. You can treat to industrial standard. You can treat to irrigation standard. So depending on where your off-takers are, what the opportunities are, your needs in a specific area, you can start looking at those reuse projects. It's also interesting that in many cases, industry are using high quality potable water for the industrial processes, which doesn't make sense. And then they discharge wastewater. So part of what that program will also look at is to see how do we recycle within those industries? How do we take the wastewater, treat it back to an industrial grade to meet their requirements and recycle that, which will reduce their reliance on potable water, and that will then make potable water available for communities. But we need to come up with bespoke solutions to them, because they might not be in the business of treating water. They're in the business of mining or paper and pulp industry or whatever. And if we can go to them and provide them with a solution that they don't have to worry about treating the water, it can also increase the security of supply. So those are the types of solutions that I think we need to build on.
Okay. Colleagues, going one last time. Any questions for Johann? Johann, thank you for spending time with us and telling us about the work that your office is doing and the non-revenue water. This was particularly interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vivek, and thanks for the opportunity, and happy to engage further if anybody is interested.
Thanks. We'll take you up on that. Thanks, Johann.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Johann.
Bye.
Bye, colleagues.